2018 was a truly incredible year for video games. This embarrassment of riches makes for a pretty good time for gamers until it comes time to decide which one is actually the best. We've got our definitive choice for the single best video game of 2018, and it might not be the one you'd expect. From the moment it was announced, Fallout 76 was already in the running to be the game of the year. The newest version of the long-running post-apocalyptic franchise shifted the single-player experience of exploring a vast post-nuclear wasteland into an online multiplayer game that ironically crafted an incredible sense of loneliness and isolation. That alone makes it a unique entry in the series. It takes Fallout back to a time when survival was still a difficult task. 200 years before factions like the NCR and the Brotherhood of Steel had reformed a version of civilization themselves. Throw in the Scorched, some Appalachian cryptids, and the eerie depopulated wasteland of West Virginia, and you've got a truly compelling game. Unfortunately, 76 also has a lot of the problems that can be seen in, well, every other Bethesda game. While the environment is compelling, a lot of the early quests, particularly in the first few hours, feel more like doing chores than exploration. The transition of established Fallout game mechanics from single-player epic to online multiplayer is also far from perfect, and the game is extremely glitchy and prone to crashing at the worst time. With a few patches and some tweaking, 76 will undoubtedly keep providing a super rewarding experience, but for now, it's simply not the best. Another odds-on favorite pick for Best of the Year is Rockstar's Red Dead Redemption 2, and make no mistake, it is a towering achievement in game design. It provides players with what might be Rockstar's best narrative ever, with a depth that's truly staggering. Players aren't just taking Arthur Morgan from one gunfight to the next, they're also keeping him fed and bathed, maintaining his equipment, interacting with NPCs who seem to remember him from one encounter to the next, and more. It's become the shorthand joke for how in-depth this game is, but the fact that there's a dedicated button for brushing your horse really does say it all. Add in a sprawling, beautiful representation of the Old West, and RDR2 brings an unmatched level of craft to the table. But in the end, as a lot of reviews have pointed out, those deep and detailed systems are often just not fun. It's building on the trend towards realism that Rockstar began with Grand Theft Auto 4, and the result is that even traversing that beautiful map they've given you can quickly turn into a frustrating exercise in wrangling your horse. If that's your thing, that's great, but most of us don't need to give Rockstar $60 to experience the thrill of feeding and bathing ourselves.
Anyway, I'll stop boring you now.
Anyone looking for an offbeat indie pick for Game of the Year would find an obvious choice in Celeste, a puzzle platformer from Matt Thorson and Noel Berry. Compared to big-name releases like the ones we've already discussed, it's a dark horse pick for 2018's best, but has a legitimate claim as an experience that excels at every single thing it attempts. The mechanics are solid, allowing the main character Madeline to interact with a series of constantly changing obstacles in a way that's simple but never gets boring. The puzzles hit that beautiful sweet spot of difficulty where it's just challenging enough to be tricky without being so mind-bendingly difficult that you're driven to rage quit. It's also incredibly accessible, and even gives you settings that provide a granular control over the difficulty. Turning on assist mode might not be a good thing for gameplay purists, but it allows everyone to experience the story. And that story is where Celeste really shines. At this point, it's a cliché for an indie game to combine pixel graphics with heavy emotional themes, and it can easily come off as pretentious. Celeste, however, offers up an exploration of depression and anxiety through the medium of a relentlessly lethal puzzle platformer in a way that blends theme and mechanics, and handles its emotional content as well as any of its AAA cousins. Celeste is absolutely essential, but it's still not quite the best. It's hard to say why it took Monster Hunter so long to catch on in the West, but we're glad it did. Its core gameplay loop, you hunt beasts and score better gear, which allows you to hunt for bigger beasts and get even better gear, is the same cycle that's propelled franchises like Destiny and Diablo to international superstardom. Monster Hunter has never been overly accessible, however, at least not until now. Monster Hunter World offers a streamlined approach to tracking, hunting, and crafting that's explicitly designed to appeal to as wide an audience as possible, and it works beautifully. It's undoubtedly the biggest RPG of the year, and if it gets its hooks into you, it's the only game from 2018 you'll need. Unfortunately for a lot of players, the repetition gets old before too long. Ultimately, it just doesn't have enough content to keep casual fans occupied, and the constant grind is just a little too tedious to take home 2018's top spot. Campy hack-and-slash adventures stuffed full of spectacle and smothered in a thick layer of machismo might have fit back in 2005, when the original God of War hit the PS2, but times have changed and so has PlayStation. These days, Sony's consoles are best known for intricate narrative adventures, and when Sony's Santa Monica studio gave God of War a makeover, it couldn't have gone better. Everything that made God of War special is still here, of course. As Kratos, you're still battling against all kinds of demons and deities and fast-paced action scenes that'll leave you gasping for breath. And yet, in 2018, that's not all God of War has to offer. Its story, which focuses on Kratos' relationship with his son Atreus, has actual heart. With the addition of the Leviathan axe, combat transforms from a mash fest into something more strategic. Well, mostly. That's God of War in a nutshell. Everything you loved before, but more thoughtful and nuanced. It's a must-play game, and more than one outlet has crowned God of War Game of the Year. It's hard to argue with them, and yet... Up to now, we've been talking about games that excel in specific areas. Well-realized worlds, compelling stories, progressive game design, and most importantly, fun. Taking all those elements into account, there's one great game that really did it all. Insomniac and Sony's PlayStation 4 Spider-Man. That probably shouldn't come as a huge surprise. There hasn't really been a bad console Spider-Man game since Neversoft dropped the first 3D Spidey adventure back in the Dreamcast era, and a great deal of that has to do with how Spider-Man works as a character. He's uniquely built for an urban environment that's easy to translate into the kind of setting common to open-world games, with superpowers that allow him to add the kind of effortless vertical element that games like the Assassin's Creed franchise have built themselves around. But that said, everything that those games have done well in the past is done immeasurably better in the PS4 Spider-Man. One of the key marks of a great game is immersion, how well the game connects you to the world that it's creating. It's one of the reasons Fallout 76's emphasis on isolation is so important, because you as a player feel the same sense of desolation and loneliness that your character is feeling. It's also why so many reviews of Spider-Man point to one seemingly simple element that makes it so good. It makes you feel like Spider-Man. Part of that is just down to the fact that Spidey's the perfect superhero for the mechanics of a video game. He's powerful, but not so powerful that he's invincible, and his reliance on technology like web shooters lends itself seamlessly to skill trees and upgrades. On a purely mechanical level, it's why there have been so many great Spider-Man games and zero good games about Superman, a character whose powers are so virtually limitless that traditional video game challenges feel awkward at best and frustratingly pointless at worst. Not coincidentally, that's the same reason that Spider-Man's approach to its title character is so reminiscent of Rocksteady's Arkham games. The key element in those was that more than anything else, they absolutely excelled at making you feel like Batman, terrifying crooks from the shadows before dropping into brutal fight scenes where you could effortlessly wreck 5 or 6 henchmen at a time. It's fair to say that Spider-Man takes more than a few cues from Arkham. The combat, for instance, it's so similar that it can actually be pretty distracting in the early game, but in doing so, it tailors the experience to fit its hero in a way that really works. For the best example of how well Spider-Man captures the feeling of being Peter Parker, look no further than the mechanic that you'll be spending the most time with: web-slinging through Manhattan. It's the make-or-break element of a Spider-Man game, and a perfect example of a key element in any open-world game. In any game where a massive map is a key selling point, traversal is one of the most important elements. And Spider-Man does that better than almost any other video game, not just this year, but ever. It's such a basic building block that you almost don't notice all the different tricks and visual cues that have gone into refining it. But the result is that the most basic aspect of the game, the simple act of moving from one place to the next, is itself an incredibly enjoyable experience. It changes the way combat works, it allows for boss fights that exist in 3 dimensions, and it encourages players to explore its Marvel Universe Manhattan from the streets to the skyscrapers without ever feeling like it's giving you another mandatory task. It says a lot that while fast travel exists in the game, and comes complete with great little cutscenes about Spider-Man riding the subway in full costume, it's never something you really want to use. Another well-done element of Spider-Man is the story, and again, the easiest comparison comes from Arkham. In the same way that those games took an approach to Batman that established him as an existing character who already knew the villains that you'd want to see him fight in a kind of greatest hits story, Spider-Man gives us a Peter Parker who's been at this for a while. Sure, he has mysteriously never fought some of his major villains before, but he's got plenty of history to build on. Instead, we get to see the origin of Dr. Octopus, which makes for a very compelling shift in narrative, and the Sinister Six to boot. There are plenty of other aspects of 2018's Spider-Man that are worth noting, including small touches like how Spider-Man's dialogue sounds more strained when he's web-slinging than when he's standing still, which is mind-blowing when you realize it.
Don't worry, Doc. I make a point not to leave anything there. but I know my friend appreciates you looking out for him. There's a lot of people who don't like him very much.
Even the choice of throwing in lesser-known villains like Screwball and Taskmaster for the side missions is great. The short version, though, is this. Every single thing that Spider-Man does, it does well. There's no fatal flaw, which makes it the most consistently, thoroughly enjoyable game of the year. In our estimation, that makes it the best.